I'm Bob Short, and this is Reflections on Georgia Politics, another in a series of oral histories sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia and the Zell and Shirley Miller Library at Young Harris College. It's Tuesday, June 9th, 2015, and we're in the Coverdale Legislative Office Building in the state capitol in Atlanta with our guest, State Representative Stacey Abrams. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being our guest. You're an attorney, a nationally known legislator, the Democratic Party minority leader in the Georgia House of Representatives, a businesswoman, a writer, a teacher, and recipient of several national awards for your outstanding public service. Let's begin, if you don't mind, about your brilliant career. It all began in Madison, Wisconsin.
So I am the daughter of Carolyn and Robert Abrams. My mom was doing graduate work at the University of Wisconsin, getting her master's of library science, and she had me. So my older sister was born in Mississippi. My parents are originally from Hattiesburg. They were in Wisconsin for my mom's graduate work, and I came along in 1973. My second sister Leslie was born in 74, and I think we moved back in 76. We moved back to Mississippi.
So you grew up in Mississippi?
I did. So I just remember being cold in Wisconsin. That's about it.
Right. What was it like growing up there?
Mississippi is a beautiful state physically, and it is a very particular place. It's complicated. I grew up in a community where we lived on the last, one of the last poor or lower middle class streets you could live on to be zoned into one of the good schools. And so we lived on South Street. There was North Street and South Street. We lived on South Street, and we lived near Anniston Avenue Elementary. So one thing I remember was just how much better the names got the closer you got to the communities. My parents are extraordinary people. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and they were very intentional about us being close to each other and taking care of each other. They had the rule that we were responsible. We had to go to church, go to school, and take care of each other. Failure in any of those areas was not acceptable. And so I love my home state. I think that it was an incredible place to learn to be a person, to learn about the complex nature of government and the complex nature of family, how complicated relationships can be around race and just who we think we are. And I think I was raised by my parents to understand that no matter who you are, your capacity is always greater than you imagine, but your responsibility was to always serve those who had less, and that those two things weren't in conflict. They had to work together. And I think Mississippi teaches you that. That's a place where we have this amazing juxtaposition of poverty and opportunity, and we haven't always figured out how to manage the two side by side, but it was a great learning environment.
What did you dream of becoming when you were a young girl growing up in Mississippi?
Oh, I contained multitudes. So I wanted to be a physicist at some point. I wanted to be a psychologist. I wanted to be an actress. Unlike my sister Leslie, who wanted to be a lawyer since she was 8, I wanted to be pretty much everything I read about and thought about.
Who did you look up to? Did you have a role model?
My mom and my older sister. My mother is one of the most extraordinary people I've ever known. She came from a very difficult background, and almost everything that she accomplished, she was the first person to do it. And so she didn't have a roadmap for much of what she accomplished in her life. Even raising us, she and my dad sort of decided they were going to create a new kind of family for themselves. And I adore my father. He was the first feminist I ever met. He never expected anything less of us because we were girls. In fact, I think his assessment of who we should be was always informed by what he saw my mother do, and there was never a question of whether we were going to be successful. And then my older sister, just because she is a thoughtful and stubborn and very demanding person, but in a really tremendous way. And so between, wanting Andy to like me, because also she was my older sister and I just wanted her to like me, and, being like my mother, those were the two women I looked up to.
I bet you were always at the top of your class.
I did very well in school.
Did you ever feel pressured to make high grades so you could attend the best college?
No, I will say this. My parents expected us to do well in school. There was never a question. And I was usually very good at it. I was not the most diligent student. And so I think my challenge was sometimes I was lazier than the circumstances warranted. And I knew I wanted to go to college. We didn't really get a choice about whether we were going to go. You got to go decide where you went. You didn't get to decide if you went. And I think like the two times I got bad grades, when that happened, my mother and father would be very insistent, like, what happened? Why couldn't you do it? I still don't know geometry. I understand proof and I can write down assumptions. And then...
Before we get into your college career, let's talk for a minute about your sister. Recently confirmed by the United States Senate as the first African American woman district court judge in Georgia.
Yes, she was.
Tell us about her.
So Leslie is younger than me we're 11 months, 27 days apart. So we're the same age for 3 days, which annoys me every year. Leslie is smart in a thoughtful way, but she's always had a very judicious attitude, in the sense that Leslie believes in fairness. She believes in doing right. She has a very strict moral code, which when you're young and you need someone to lie, she's not the person to turn to, because she giggles when she lies and it doesn't work. But Leslie intellectually has a deep desire to understand, and I think that's why she's going to make such an extraordinary judge. She is emblematic of what can be done when people are given the opportunity to just be who they are, and I'm deeply proud of her.
You attended Spelman College in Atlanta. Tell us about that.
My mother tricked me. I actually didn't want to go to college in the South and did not want to go to a girls' school. Wasn't allowed to date till I was 16, and I did not want to go spend, I was 16 when I was senior in high school, and I did not want to squander my first opportunities at dating at a girls' school. But my mother said, just apply, you don't have to go, just apply. So I applied. And I got in, and she said, well, just go visit. You don't have to go, just go visit. And I went to visit, and I met Janetta Cole, who was the president of the college, and just a very inspiring person. And I saw Morehouse College, and I'd never seen that many men in a room together before, and those were two very compelling reasons to attend that college. But at Spelman, it was the first time I became involved in politics, and it was the first time I'd run for office. I hadn't thought of myself as someone who would run for office, but I like getting stuff done, and I found that the most efficient way to make people do what I wanted was to get a title and tell them. And so I eventually became the president of the student body.
You graduated there and went to University of Texas.
I did.
And Lyndon Baines Johnson School of Public Affairs. What did you learn there?
I was there for a year. I took a class from Elspeth Rostow, who was an amazing teacher. I was there the last year that that Barbara Jordan was teaching, although she did not allow first-year students into her class. I got to see her speak. And I was there when Ann Richards was governor. And so that triumvirate really, I think, crystallized for me how incredibly important government could be in the lives of those who had the deepest need. That had always been my instinct, and intellectually I knew that's why I was interested, but having those three women who had very different vantage points on how important politics could be to changing lives and learning from them in different ways, I think was transformative in the way I thought about how I wanted to engage the political process.
And then to law school.
Then went to Yale for law school.
Yale. Why Yale?
They let me in. So I applied to Texas to do a joint degree program, and the year I started was the year of the Hopwood decision, which meant that they were going to dramatically reduce the number of students of color who were eligible to attend the law school, and I would have been one of a handful at UT, and it was a very large law school. And at the same time, a friend of mine, I won a Truman Scholarship, and the head of the foundation essentially dared me to apply to Yale. I didn't want to apply because, well, I'm a pretty good student. I wasn't a great student at Spelman. I spent way too much time doing activism and not as much time as I should have focusing on academics. But he dared me to apply, and I applied, and they let me in. And I thought, well, if they're willing to let me come, I should go and visit. And I went, and I could not have asked for a better law school experience.
Good. Where to from there?
Left Yale to come back to Atlanta. I trained in tax policy. I actually ended up working with John Simon, who was a tax expert at Yale, and then interned with Sutherland, Asbill, and Brennan in Atlanta, which had one of the most respected tax programs in the country, especially with nonprofit tax organizations. And they gave me a job, and so I was a nonprofit tax attorney for Sutherland for about 3.5 years.
And then you were a city attorney.
Shirley Franklin became mayor and appointed Linda DeSantis as city attorney, and she wanted to reorganize the law department and wanted to create a division that married law and policy, because most of the legal work was spot on, but there wasn't always the attention to how the policy had to be implemented. And because of my background in both law and policy and my very strong desire for public service, she said she wanted to create this division and asked me if I'd be interested in doing it. I reminded her that I wasn't old enough to have that job, and she said she didn't care, and so I took it.
29.
29, became deputy city attorney for Atlanta.
How long were you there?
Another 3.5 years, which seems to be my timing. So I was there for about 3.5 years, and then the seat in the legislative district where I lived came open. And I'd spent a lot of time at the city working with the state, helping the mayor with her legislative agenda. And I realized there weren't a lot of people who ran for office who'd actually ever worked for government. You had a lot of people who'd been in elected offices, so they'd been mayors and city council members, county commissioners. But it's very different when your job is to help implement the laws that legislators create. And so I thought it would be an important opportunity for me to understand the legislative process, but also I thought I could contribute because not a lot of bureaucrats run for office, and I thought I'd try it.
Well, before we get into your political career, I want to talk to you for just a moment about your business career. You're a very astute business person. Tell us about some of your business enterprises.
When I left the city of Atlanta to run for office, I had to figure out a way to afford my house, and I started a consulting firm. I had created a couple of opportunities for the city, and they hired me to come on board. The Atlanta Beltline had been created, and I was responsible for the legislation, but also for the quasi-governmental structure that made it a nonprofit with some governmental responsibilities, but with an independence. And when I got ready to leave, they said, "You're not leaving without telling us how this works." And so they hired me, and I negotiated a pretty good price for myself and built a reputation as someone who understood the intersection of public and private enterprise when it comes to particularly public-private development. Worked with a business partner who was a young woman that I'd met during a leadership program, Laura Hodgson. She was in my Leadership Atlanta class, and she had come from the real estate side. And she and I both were being asked to help people think about complex business infrastructure programs, especially public infrastructure. And we decided we'd go into business together. She loved selling, and I loved being able to think about the intricacies, and we had complementary skills, and so we decided to go into business together. So I first created SageWorks, and then we created Insomnia Consulting together. We did that one, and then we also created a bottled water company. We were doing very well with that until the bottom fell of the market. We had an opportunity to sell to a major company, but they wanted such a large order that we would have grown ourselves to death. We couldn't afford it. And we looked around for a business solution, trying to find the capital. We were not successful because the market this was after 2008, so getting a loan was incredibly hard. We actually ran into another person who was on the cusp of giving us a loan, and then there was a challenge with their company. But he came to us with an idea about how to solve for companies like ours who had products and had customers but couldn't meet the customer needs. And so the three of us worked together for about 10 months, and then we created a new company called Now Account. And so Now Account is the company we have today, which is a revenue accelerator. We provide financial support for small businesses. And that came out of our personal experiences, but also from our consulting work. And so I've been very lucky to find opportunities to use both my tax background, my interest in business, but also trying to serve community needs. I think the best businesses are ones where it meets your passion. And for me, the public service passion feeds into all of the things I do. And being able to help small businesses has been an extraordinary opportunity.
Well, we can't forget about your career as an author.
Yes.
What inspired you to write?
So I grew up in the stacks. My mother was a librarian, and we literally used to take naps in the stacks. I learned to read when I was very, very young, and my mother never constrained what I read. So I read all kinds of things. Some, I think, at this point were deeply inappropriate for someone my age, but I always loved reading. My dad was an amazing storyteller. He would tell us stories at bedtime. And so for me, it was a combination of, I'd read a lot. My dad used to tell these amazing stories. My mother used to read to us at night. And I loved books. I still, to this day, it's my favorite thing to do. And I was a good writer. And so during law school, I thought, this is my last opportunity to write a novel, which is not what you should think during your third year of law school. But as I said, I'm not the most diligent student always. So I decided to write a novel. A friend of mine was in publishing, and it was a spy novel. And my friend said, look, the publishing world doesn't publish spy novels by or about women. And I thought that was absurd, but I wasn't in the mood to try to change the entire publishing space. So I made my spies fall in love after they killed all the people they were going to kill and got it published as a romance novel. And then the editor who bought the first book bought two more. And then I got a call from St. Martin's Press. And there was an editor there who'd read my first book and said, when you're out of your contract, give me a call. She bought my fourth one. And then a gentleman whose girlfriend gave him one of my books while he was sick called me and said, I bet you don't have an agent because you don't write romance and you don't write suspense, and I don't think people know what you are. And that was exactly true. And he became my agent and got me connected to HarperCollins, and I sold 5 books to them, or 4 to them. And
Gosh, that's 8 books.
I've been prolific.
8 books, that's amazing. And they all got published. Any more in the works?
So I have a legal thriller that I have been working on for way too long. I just have to get myself to a place where I can edit it and get it off to my agent. And then got a couple of more ideas in the works. I just have to find some time. It's gotten a little harder with my legal career, with my legislative career, to write as much as I like writing.
Gosh, you're amazing. Now that you've embarked on that successful political career, very time-consuming political career, how do you keep your priorities straight?
I think that the most responsible thing to do is to meet the needs that are the most urgent and to be honest about what you can and cannot do. It's not that there's too much to be done, it's just a matter of being clear about what the priorities are. And for me, I have a business obligation, I have a legislative obligation, and writing is a personal passion, which is why it's taken a backseat in a way that it hasn't in the past. But it's still part of who I am, and so I will find a way to make it work. I also have a social justice responsibility, and so the work we do on voter registration and voter engagement is also critical. And so for me, it's just making sure that I fit each of those components in. None of them get too much primacy, but they all have an opportunity to exist. I just have to ratchet it up or ratchet it down depending on the need.
So it comes 2006, you decide to run for the state legislature. If I'm not mistaken, that was an open seat.
It was.
When McClendon decided not to run.
Exactly.
She's a dear friend of mine, as a matter of fact. And I remember her dropping out, and I remember you running. And I remember you had no opposition.
Oh, no, I had 2 opponents.
Oh, you did?
Oh, yes. George Maddox, who had held the seat adjacent until redistricting.
Right. I want to talk to you about redistricting, but
yes.
I don't want to get into that right now because it's such a lengthy thing that we won't be able to fully discuss it. I want to thank you, though, for sharing your time with us. And really, I look forward to talking to you again soon.
I look forward to it as well.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.